This is my first tutorial video. By request, I am going to show you how to do a niche inside an altered book. This is something that I learned to do a few years ago, and I'd like to show you the cover of one of my altered books, where you will see that there's a little niche cut out here in the front to make room for the apple. And then if you were to look inside, there was also another niche in here, a circle niche with a little bottle of blood and a bottle cap, some moss, and some flowers. And this incorporates a big section of the book so that you can get that 3D inside look, actually. So, what we're going to do is we are going to cut a niche in this book right here. We're going to cut one from inside. There are two options available to you to cut a niche. You can either use the box cutter method, which is what I've used on all of mine so far, or you can try and use a rather large punch. Recently, Fiskars came out with a anywhere on the page punch, which I really like the idea of it. Unfortunately for me, they're still a little too small as far as their circumference of size for the niche that I'm looking for. So if you do want to try the punch idea, keep in mind that while you are punching, you are limited to where you can place the hole. So say you wanted to use this big round punch. You are limited to your placement. You have to be careful because you don't want to be too far up or too far to the side where it weakens the page, even when you glue them together. This one would work really well for this size book, whereas I was trying to get this large scallop punch in here and really couldn't get it placed where I felt comfortable enough to actually punch it. So I am not going to do that method today. Hopefully Fiskars will come out with a larger anywhere on the page punch for us altered book people. So let's start. First thing that is important is, of course, a cutting mat. You do not want to cut through to your table, and if you've worked with a straight edge before, you know that it's not unlikely to slip. So cutting mat, straight edge tool. I have a couple pieces of wax paper here, and I'll show you why. Some different clamps. These are your large page clips. I like these clamps that I found at my local hardware store. They're fantastic. Selection of Mod Podge or whatever gel medium that you would like to use. I use Mod Podge just because it's easily available to me and seems to really work. And then some brushes. Generally, for this project, I use a foam brush. You can use a paintbrush if you would like. So let's get started. Select a section in your book. Usually you want to make sure that there's enough pages to kind of give it some strength. Again, you're going to be weakening these by cutting a piece out of them. In this book, for instance, this is going to be a Christmas altered book that I've done. And in this one, I've decided to cut 2 holes. So you can see my first one here is cut out. And I chose a pretty hefty section of pages. About 200, actually, and then Mod Podge them together. So the easiest thing to do is to start with the Mod Podge. I'm going to look at this one and say we're going to do the altered part closer to the back. That should be enough in a book this size. So I picked 339 through 482. Alright. So, to make this easy for yourself, that's what these binder clips are for. Clip the pages you want. And then take it one step further. Nope, that's not going to work. Let's try this side. Clip to there. And then let's clip these guys down too. That way you're not fighting with them. Alright, so In this one, we're going to use just a plain satin Mod Podge. Some of my other books, you can see I've used the glitter Mod Podge, which turns out really awesome if you want a highly glittered edge. There is no special way to do this. Literally, you're going to hold your pages, make sure they're as close together as possible, and just slap it on. You want to kind of separate them a little bit, especially on the edges, so that you can get in there and make sure that they adhere to each other. Do not be selfish with the Mod Podge. You almost cannot have too much. Almost. This is going to dry clear, so it's not going to detract from the overall look of the book. Now with the glitter, of course, when it does dry, it's not dry and clear, so you're going to be able to see it on the edges of the page. The great thing about the Mod Podge is that while you put a thick layer on there, a thick coat, it looks really cool. The gel mediums, it just has a nice little touch to it. So as you can see, there's a pretty thick coat of Mod Podge on here. If I see pages kind of gaping, I will try to incorporate more Mod Podge into that area to fill it up. And I do go all the way down to the spine of the book. I'm also going to clean up my edges a little bit. Well, as I said, it's going to dry clear. If it's thick, it can dry in what looks like a drip. And if that's not the look you're going for, you'll want to kind of clean up your edges. Now, once you feel like you've got a good thick coat on your edges here, you're going to take, and this is where the wax paper comes in. I have found that it generally prevents it from tearing. You're going to take your binder clip, cover it with your wax paper here loosely, and put your binder clip on. That's going to squeeze the pages together. That's going to hold all that Mod Podge gel medium in there, kind of get it all working in, and then you just keep moving on. Alright, so there's that. I'm going to set that aside and let it dry. Depending on how much Mod Podge you put on there will depend on how long it needs to dry. Mod Podge, I believe, cures 100% within a month, but you can work on it once it's dry to the touch. It won't bother you. It'll just be a little tacky. Just keep that in mind. Alright, let's put this away. And to actually cut the niche, what we're going to do is we're going to work on this book now. So what I have done with this is I have already cut out or drawn out my niche shapes or sizes. I wanted 2 squares, so that's where I'm at with this. I've already done one. Just take your little straight edge here. The best thing to do is to do your first cut. And then pull them out. Pull out the little pages that you've cut through. This is how you start your niche. and you'll just keep cutting all the way down. The great thing about having a cutting mat is, you probably can't see this, when I cut through this niche here, I accidentally cut this little image, and I really liked the image of it. Like this lady sitting here with her car and the trees, and I accidentally cut a little bit of the image because I went too far through. Do not be afraid to take your cutting mat and stick it through, and then that way you know you're not going to cut through to the side of the book that you don't want to cut through. So, just keep cutting. Now, depending on your shape, will depend on how much extra work you need to give it. And what I mean by that is, you can see, when I pull some of these out, of course, there's going to be leftover pieces of the book. Here as well. This one I kind of gave up on, I guess. Wow. And I just Mod Podged it together. So, once you start doing this, like I said, you're going to see little pieces of fuzzies in the corners if you're cutting a square or a rectangle. It's fine. There's some really great tools out there that you can find. I believe these are We Are Memory Keepers tools. I've had them so long I actually don't remember. They're little rasps, and they fit into these little corners just perfectly. So if you wanted to file it down, you didn't like how it looked, you get in there with that little rasp. If you don't have that, not a big deal. An emery board works really well too. You can get in there with those little corners and file those down also. Or you can just leave the rough edges as it is. It adds some texture, maybe it adds some interest to you, perfectly fine. So once you actually have cut out your niche, you're going to go back to your Mod Podge and you're going to apply a layer of Mod Podge inside your niche as well. Just like so. All the way around. Get really into those pages. Make sure that they're gripping each other. You can squeeze there a little bit with your hand. If your book has dried or if you have enough extra binder clips, don't be afraid to grab one. Excuse me. And shove it in there to hold it together so that the pages adhere to each other. That is how you create a niche inside a book. The same process would work for creating a niche on the outside of a book as well, such as what I did with the Twilight book. The niche is done exactly the same way. Gathered the pages, glued them to the cover, and then began to cut. Inside this one, I'm not sure if you can see, there's paint. I painted that niche. We painted the inside of this niche on the edges. Here's another altered book that we did. This one has a niche inside of it, and it is painted as well. No, actually it's not painted, excuse me. I began cutting this one, found this cute little picture of this girl and her parents, I'm assuming, and stopped there with it. I did add a little bit of Mod Podge on the inside, and then just painted the cover of the page. You'll notice I used the fabulous glitter Mod Podge on the edge of this, and see the fantastic effect that it creates to kind of give you a feel of what I mean. But you can paint right over the top of it if you don't like it. If you want to have a different color here and you want to do a clear Mod Podge and then paint over it, you definitely can do that. The only limit is your imagination.